My name is Yadvinder Malhi. I am Professor of Ecosystem Science at the University of Oxford. Welcome to my exp. So some of the earliest changes occurred when humans expanded out of Africa into other continents and started hunting out the large animals, the megafauna, when they moved onto islands, such as in the Pacific, and pushed certain species to extinction. But more recently, the rate of change on ecosystems has been accelerating. And the biggest factor that is driving that is the conversion of natural ecosystems into mainly agriculture and cattle lands and ranches. So the loss of natural habitat is causing a decline of these ecosystems and a decline of the biodiversity that is in those systems. But as we move forward into the 21st century and later into the 21st century, an additional agent of change is coming through, and that is climate change. And that's affecting ecosystems that are even more remote from the direct and immediate loss of habitat around deforestation, etc., and is likely to have a much broader range of effects. Over half of the biodiversity, the variety of species found on Earth, are found within the canopies and the soil of tropical forests. But also a lot of the functioning of the biosphere is determined by what happens in the tropics. So the tropics contain much of the carbon that is stored in living biomass on Earth in tropical forests. A lot of the water that circulates through tropical forests, the rain falls onto a forest, the roots of the trees pick up that water, transpire it and evaporate it through their leaves, push it back into the atmosphere where it condenses into clouds and forms rain. That circle of water in the tropics is an engine of the entire global circulation of water that drives global patterns of weather. So as tropical ecosystems begin to be lost and degraded, they matter particularly because they're so influential locally for the weather regimes that they produce, but also on a much larger scale. And in terms of biodiversity, when we lose a patch of the tropics, we lose the great museums, the great reservoirs of the diversity on the planet that has evolved over millions or billions of years. And so they're particularly valuable treasure houses of the richness of life on Earth. Humans have been deforesting and changing forests since the dawn of agriculture. So we see patterns of deforestation pick up in the Middle East with the early agricultural civilizations. We see the same in Mexico with the civilizations of Mesoamerica, or in India, or in China. And the expansion of agriculture has always been accompanied by the axe taking down the tree and converting that area into agricultural systems. And that's a big part of what's needed to sustain human civilization. But what has happened over the 20th century is that these frontiers have moved more and more into areas that were once remote wilderness areas, or areas that were relatively unaffected or difficult to transform, such as the vast forests of the Amazon or the Congo or Borneo. And this is because technology has enabled that, the greater connectivity, technology such as the chainsaw that are able to take down these highly productive tropical regions. And so it is important to recognize there is a long history of deforestation. So when we're concerned about what's happening, say, in the Amazon now, we do need to recognize that in Europe or in North America, we live in amongst the great most deforested landscapes on Earth. And there is a need to restore and bring back some of these natural ecosystems in this highly degraded landscapes of, for example, Europe. But while we could look at that, we also need to be concerned about not losing the vast treasure houses in the tropics, where most of the deforestation now is found in tropical regions. That's where the expansion of agricultural frontiers is happening. That's where often areas have quite poor governance, so there isn't much regulation of what's going on, and you have quite lawless frontier regions where anything goes, where we're seeing loss of a habitat that isn't just detrimental to the natural world and to biodiversity, but often to many of the cultures and societies that live in those in those tropical frontier regions. A tipping point is a shift where you tip the ecosystem into a fundamentally different state, and that can have effects on biodiversity, can have effects on lots of the function that the ecosystem has, a lot of the goods and resources that it provides to people who are used to depend on that ecosystem. At a global level, tipping points are important because they signify what could be defined as dangerous levels of climate change. So at the moment that we're experiencing significant amounts of climate change, and it's what could be called fairly linear. So a certain degree of carbon dioxide from our fossil fuel emissions in the atmosphere is causing a certain amount of warming. And now we're about 1 degree Celsius warmer than the planet was in the pre-industrial era, and then our models can predict that very well, and we have a fairly good understanding. Where tipping points start mattering is where the behavior of the biosphere itself starts affecting the rate of climate change. So at the moment, the biosphere is absorbing roughly, the land biosphere absorbs around a quarter of the carbon dioxide that we emit in fossil fuel emissions. And therefore it acts as a moderate brake on the rate of climate change. If the biosphere wasn't doing what it's doing now, the rate of climate change would be around 15–20% faster than it is now. However, the real fear with tipping points is that the biosphere stops being this moderate brake on climate change and becomes an accelerator of climate change. So if the Amazon starts dying back in substantial amounts, all the carbon that's locked up in Amazon trees or in the Amazon soil starts pouring into the atmosphere. Similarly, if the permafrost regions of the high Arctic and the boreal regions, these frozen soils rich in carbon, start warming and melting, they release carbon to the atmosphere, causing further warming.